What's up YouTube? Today we're here to talk about one of my dear clients, David, and how he managed to achieve this incredible transformation of losing 11 kilos in only 20 weeks. We will do a full case study on him so you will understand every aspect of his transformation, what his goals were, what we set as our goals together, what we did with his nutrition, with his training, and every little detail that you would want to know. I'm David Mirza from Catalyst. We're a team of coaches working with successful people online as well as in central London who want to gain control over shaping their bodies and add years to their lives by losing 7 to 10 kilos in the first 12 to 15 weeks of working with us. Now, to start off with some background information, David used to go to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. He was training, like many people, consistently for decades. I think about 15, 17 years of semi-consistent training. He was also doing intermittent fasting. From Monday till Friday, he was only eating between 1 p.m. and 9 p.m. and he was basically fasting for 16 hours of the day. And like so many Catalyst clients, he was leading an extremely busy life. He was actually working 10 to 12 hours per day as well as a little bit in the weekends. Now, after he started fasting, he lost about 3 kilos in total, but after that he got stuck, and that's when he decided to reach out to me. The last piece of information that you should know about him is that he had a pretty bad knee injury a few years before, and he had a torn ACL as well. So some of his goals were related to this. Now, one of his main goals was to go down to 72 kilos, which we will talk about in a second why I didn't think it was a good goal. He wanted to get back in the same shape he was in 15 years ago. He wanted to just have more confidence walking around on the beach without a top and to not be tired when he goes up the stairs or when he runs to catch a bus. Now, on top of these goals, he wanted to obviously preserve as much muscle as possible and maybe even build some, and he wanted to get his legs much stronger in a safe way, taking into account his previous knee injury. From an early point, he was voicing that he was not a huge fan of cardio, so we also had to take that into account. Now, after I received his initial information, which every client fills out after signing up with us, I also realized that there were a couple other goals that we had to focus on in order for him to hit those goals that he wanted. So while my goal was to obviously achieve everything that he wanted, we also needed to fine-tune and advise him a little bit. So one of the biggest issues we need to improve on was his sleep. If you are trying to optimize both for fat loss as well as muscle building, sleep is the foundation that everything is built on. Basically, sleep is the multiplier on all your efforts. If you're putting in all the effort but you're not sleeping, you will not lose body fat as quickly and you will probably lose a little bit more muscle than you should. Equally, if you sleep really well, you will lose body fat much easier, you will recover from your training much easier, and you can expect to maybe even build some muscle. Now, reading through his information, it was pretty clear that one of the main things to address was his caffeine intake in order to improve his sleep, so we immediately installed a 9-hour caffeine cutoff from his bedtime. We also implemented further little changes that are outlined in our Catalyst Sleep Mastery Guide that you can find in the description for free. While I respected that his goal was getting down to 72 kilos, I also knew that it wasn't going to be enough for what he really wanted to achieve. Most people, when they sign up, they don't really have full belief that they can get to this kind of physique behind me, so they're sort of setting the bar a little bit lower. And after taking his body composition measurements, I was pretty sure that we would need to go a little bit lower. The fact is, most people have never gotten to the point where they're close to 10 to 12% body fat, and it's very simple math. If you have a certain amount of body fat and you take it down and you go down to 10 to 12%, you will have much less weight on you, and that is sometimes scary for people to understand. But as long as you're holding on to all the muscle, it's all just fat that is getting lost, and why would you want to store more of it? So for him, there was this little bit of a psychological barrier, being afraid to cross 70 kilos because he was worried he would be too skinny, but like the end result speaks for itself, and eventually he agreed to the goal as well, and he wanted to push further. Most often what happens is, as soon as people see that they're not really suffering, they're getting the fat loss pretty easily, and having abs and being nearly fat-free is truly within reach, they start actually aiming for it. Now, the last thing that really stuck out in his form submission was that he wasn't really processing food very well. After having higher carbs or higher fats both, he was feeling a little bit more lethargic, a little bit sleepy. So I wanted to get him to a point where we can increase his food after having lost all that body fat, and his body will utilize food as energy as opposed to just going into a full-on food coma. So at Catalyst, every client has a progress tracker, and shockingly, this is where we keep track of their progress. Usually there's targets on the left and there are the metrics that we measure on the right. So you can see that he started with 80 kilos body weight. He actually started a little bit earlier with 80 and a half, but whatever. And over 20 weeks, he went down to a record low of 69.3. So a total of nearly 11 kilo lost in just under 20 weeks. Initially, we started off on 1800 calories, which might be like, oh, that's a little bit low. Yes, but if you look at his step target, it was 5,500. So it was a very, very low step target. Obviously, if your activity is higher, you can set a higher food intake for yourself and still expect to lose body fat. But if your activity is low and he didn't want to do cardio, he didn't have time to do steps. And to be honest, this is the case for many of our clients. Many of our clients are extremely busy. They cannot afford to spend 6 hours in the gym to do 20,000 steps or to do multiple cardio sessions. So a lot of the time we just have to compensate on the food front for having a little bit lower activity. As you can see, initially his fat loss was really low. So we started on the 1st of February and 14 days later, he was still 79.8, so almost the same body weight, which is quite common actually. A lot of the time in the beginning, weight just doesn't really want to move. Even if you are losing body fat, potentially you're just holding on to a little bit more water, or potentially your muscles are filling up a little bit because you're getting back to training, or very, very common is that you're coupling your new routine with some creatine intake, and actually creatine can make you hold on to intracellular water as well. So basically water in the muscle, which is not a bad thing, but it can mask the weight loss effect that you would realize on the scales. Now, as a coach, it's pretty difficult to balance knowing this and explaining it to a client and at the same time producing some change. Obviously, everyone's motivation is the highest when they get started. That's when they're the most bought in. And if you carry on with the program, 2 weeks later, you weigh the same after standing on the scales every single day, that can be a little bit demotivating. And actually, David was in this mindset where he started stressing about it a little bit. So we did actually reduce his food a tiny bit. Now, this doesn't mean that I would make the same decision with everyone. Again, as a coach, you sort of have to weigh the sides against each other. And if someone is really chilled about not making as much fat loss progress, or maybe it's really visible on their body despite the scales not moving, then sure, we can just carry on with the same structure. But if someone is stressing, someone is losing their conviction in the program, you have to protect that at all costs. So when he got started, we initially assembled the food structure, and then we just carried on with that food structure the whole time. He was extremely busy. So for someone like him, I do not recommend calorie counting because it just takes so much time on the apps. So instead, what we do at Catalyst is we group foods into certain food groups, lean protein, fatty protein, carb, and fat sources, and we tell each client to pick and choose from those tables and assemble their own meals basically. So the structure gives them the freedom to choose ingredients that they enjoy eating, but it also gives them the structure to ultimately control calories without having to explicitly track calories in an app. Now, once we have the food structure established, we ask for food pictures from every client for every single meal. And some people love it, others absolutely hate it because they're like, oh my god, I'm now a food influencer having to take pictures of my food. But most clients actually want to carry on with this because they find it's a good accountability tool. So that's exactly what we did with David as well. He kept sending food pictures throughout the entire 20 weeks, and his food was mostly consisting of lots of vegetables, complex, high quality carbs, high quality fats like olive oil and nuts, lots of fruit, lots of protein, obviously. The big question is obviously how you implement this kind of eating into someone's life, right? We are all different with very different structures, preferences, and lives. And the difficult part of the job is figuring out the structure that works for the individual. Now, another thing that must be highlighted is the meals out column. So if you look at it, initially there weren't very many meals out, but eventually they got quite frequent. So if I highlight the whole column, we will get that just under 19 weeks, he had 57 meals out. So that's exactly on average 3 meals out per week, which is much more than most people would do, or much more than you would expect from someone that achieved such an impressive result. And most of the success also comes down to just tailoring his food choices around these meals out. So one thing that we did was providing help with choosing from menus. So if he knew where he was going, we always helped him pick in advance. So you make better decisions than in the heat of the moment in the restaurant. And the other thing is just simply having low enough calories throughout the week that even if the weekend/meal out days are a little bit higher, your total weekly average is still allowing you to stay in a calorie deficit and burn body fat. Now, as a general rule of thumb, if you look at somebody's progress records, what you should find is that things start getting more intense as they go further into the program. Initially, you want to preserve some ammo, not use it all up, and do as little as you can and make progress with. And then as you keep making progress, as the body starts to slow down a little bit, resist change, you might want to add in a little bit more activity, take away some food potentially. So that's exactly what we did as well with David. About 6 weeks in, we added in one cardio session, mostly for health actually. It wasn't really, oh my god, we need to burn more calories, because in that case we wouldn't just have done a cardio session, but he actually said that he was open to doing some for health reasons. So it was just one 30-minute session, zone 2 as well, maintaining nose breathing throughout. And then eventually, when he got to this really busy period of him having meals out as well as traveling a lot, so within 2 weeks here, he was having 13 meals out, which is insane. That's on average 1 meal out per day almost. At that point, we reduced his carb servings by 1 to compensate for the extra fats that you will inevitably encounter in any meal out. And we sort of kept up the same structure. Overall, he took 6 international travels over the 20 weeks, and we only really started pushing in the last 2 weeks, where it was every day a little bit of cardio, 20 minutes first thing in the morning. And then to go into the photo shoot that we finished up with, we obviously took our foot off the gas and had him relax and eat a little bit more. So contrary to popular belief, when you do a photo shoot and you want to look good for that event, you don't want to keep starving yourself into it, keep working yourself into it, but instead what happens is about 1 week out, you start eating a little bit more, take activity down, and relax into the shoot, so you look much better, much less hungry, much less cranky, with better energy. Now that was pretty much the progress tracker summarized, and with every client that trains with us in person, we also have a body fat tracker where we caliper them, which gives us a pretty accurate reading of their body fat percentage. So the first time I could caliper him was actually 2 weeks in, when he was 22%. So you can see the date for this is the 14th of February, but we started on the 1st of February. So actually, initially, he was so inflamed and had so much body fat that I couldn't do the measurement on him. This is actually very common. So I would estimate that he probably started around 25% body fat. As you can see, by the end around the photo shoot, it went down to 11. So that's extremely low, not to the point where it's dangerous or hard to sustain. And in fact, that's for another video, but he did sustain the same body fat. We're keeping in touch. I see pictures of him, and he's still 1.5 years later in the same exact shape. Now, the lean mass measurement is not the most accurate, because same as how I was unable to caliper him in the beginning because his body fat was so inflamed and hard to pinch. Similarly, initially, when someone has a little bit more body fat, lean mass is estimated a little bit higher. It was estimated at 62.2 kilograms, meaning everything, if all the fat was taken off, he would have been 62.2 kilos. And by the end, when he got to 11%, we settled at 61.5 kilos lean mass. So you could say, oh, well, why is that lower after so much training? Well, there are 2 reasons for that. One, like I said, initial measurements always overestimate lean mass a little bit. Muscles are fuller at this stage because you haven't really dieted all the glycogen out of them. Plus, measurements are not as accurate due to inflammation. And equally, when you get to the end, your muscles are not full. So your muscles are capable of storing between 1.5 to 3 kilos of glycogen, so carbs in the muscle as a local energy source. After dieting, those stores will be depleted, meaning if I just shove shoved a lot of carbs in him at this stage, he probably would have been 1.5 to 3 kilos heavier, which would all be carbs in the muscle, so basically lean mass. So I would estimate that worst case, this was a 63 kilo lean mass, which is awesome. Now, truth be told, with his injury history, I would estimate that potentially a significant chunk of this extra muscle that he built was on his lower body, because we did start training them and got them to a pretty strong level without any knee pain over the 20 weeks, and he must have built a lot of his previous leg strength and muscle mass back. Now, a pretty objective measurement to finish with, his waist circumference went down 10 centimeters, which is a lot. And that's pretty much it for the body fat tracker. Now let's move on to the training program. You will probably be shocked to hear that in the 20 weeks, we only ran 2 training programs. So we started off with one and we only changed it halfway through, and that was it. Meaning each training phase was done for 10 weeks. Each training phase consisted of 2 separate training sessions, and he trained with me in the gym twice per week only. So every Tuesday and Thursday we did a different program, but we kept with that Tuesday-Thursday combination for the next 10 weeks. On top of the 2 sessions that he did with me, he also trained by himself another 2 times, but it was a little bit more fluffy. I actually wrote him a training program for that as well, but it eventually just turned into him training chest and arms and shoulders like every guy would, and I was actually okay with that. We did give his back and legs enough of a beating in the other 2 sessions that it was actually perfectly fine. But I think a mistake that a lot of people make is changing their training program too often. A lot of people do that in order to confuse the muscle or create a different training stimulus or introduce some variety into their training. But the reality is you have to standardize your execution and make every rep the same with good technique. From there, you need to learn to apply effort. And once these 2 are ticked off, you want to consistently keep getting stronger in the gym. Now, this is my method of teaching a client to do exactly that, just defining the tempo, determining the end ranges, tightening the end ranges. So this is the technique pyramid in purple and then the effort pyramid in blue. And once you've done that, your job is to work your butt off and keep getting stronger. Now, constantly program hopping, constantly changing the workout is never going to allow you to do that. You will never have consistent technique. You will always be in this stage of sort of figuring the movement out, but not being neurologically efficient enough at it, meaning your nervous system is actually not very good at executing the movement. On top of this, if you keep changing a program, you never really know what weights to use for the new exercise, so it becomes this experiment that takes 2 weeks, and then after another 1 or 2 weeks, everyone just changes their program. So basically, every 4 weeks, you end up working 2 weeks, which is 50% efficiency. What my guys do is they have 1 or 2 weeks to dial everything in, and then they repeat for the next 8. So that's immediately much better ratio. Now, I'm not going to waste time with what exact exercises we did and how those changed over these different training phases, but if you want to know exactly how to assemble a training program like we did for David, you can just go to the description and find a link to our free Catalyst training plan. Now, to wrap this up, here's what David has to say about the whole experience and how his life changed due to it.
I was going like 4 or 5 days to the gym, but not getting good results. My mental status was not that good. Maybe that's another reason why I started. I started in 80.5 kilos. Yesterday, my weight is 69.3, more than 11 kilos done. And also, I have not lost a lot of muscles, so I'm very happy. 2 things that I never had before, of course, abs, but also shoulders and back. My shoulders and my back are better or bigger than ever. I feel more confident. David has something that is very important, and is to focus on you all the time. Like, you have to send the pictures of the food, whatever you do, you have to report. So it's not like just train and do your life. You feel under control. So he controls you very well, but at the same time, this is what you need.
If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments. If you have any suggestions for upcoming videos, please just leave them below as well. If you like this video and want to learn more about fat loss and health for really busy professionals, please subscribe. And if you want to work with us, just submit the form below.